back. It is Security Field Day 11, and we couldn't let you go without having a little bit of a discussion with all of our delegates here. It's a roundtable. One of the things that is near and dear to our heart is the ability for our group of practitioners and future group analysts to add their 2 cents to the conversation, because it turns out that they are very knowledgeable about a lot of topics, and they have a unique perspective. And like I said in the previous segment, based on what we've seen from our YouTube views of these roundtables over the last year, a lot of you are very interested in their perspective as well. And we've covered a lot of topics on these things, but I wanted to jump in and talk about something that is actually a topic that was brought up this morning by Ben Story, cyber insurance. Yeah, that's right. You can buy cyber insurance now. You've actually been able to do it for a couple of years. It's a great way to hedge your risk against something like a data breach or your systems all being locked up. But the market for cyber insurance has transformed significantly, even in the last 6 months. There's a lot of interesting developments that are happening there, as well as what Ben had originally kind of posited with this, is the cyber insurance market is actually driving a lot of investment into certain specific kinds of technologies because they're almost seen as mandatory in order for cyber insurance policies to be able to take effect. So I want to start off a little bit by kind of opening up to the floor and kind of discussing this. Has anybody had to deal with cyber insurance? Taryn. So what's been your experience with cyber insurance so far?
It's been fine. It's just been another audit, basically, in the steady stream of audits that we have to go through every year. So, like the ones that we've dealt with, typically have paperwork that you have to attest to a whole bunch of things. We haven't had to have an outside penetration test per se, but they do run a bit site sort of scan of your systems to pick up like TLS headers that are version 1 or whatever, things like that, right? And we have to fix those things, and then we have to attest to a whole bunch of other things. But I'm guessing in the next year or two, it's going to turn into a situation where you actually have to have somebody come on site and do a full-blown audit in order to get the insurance, because it's trending that way. But
now,
we'll see.
Why do you need to sign off on all this stuff? What is the purpose of having cyber insurance?
Well, as you've said, basically, the purpose for us is in case we get breached. We've got money, we've got things coming in that we can afford to deal with it. The insurance companies, of course, like you said, don't want to pay, so it's a little bit of a back and forth, to get the policy where you want it.
So we were actually discussing this just a little bit before we started, but I may be a little jaded because I'm currently dealing with an insurance company that will remain nameless, Jake. But the problem is that contractually, an insurance company is required to meet the terms of the policy if what triggers that policy happens. Anyone who has ever dealt with an insurance company knows the amount of arguing that has to go on in order for them to agree to meet that. It's a lot like trying to put your kids to bed. Suddenly they become Dungeons and Dragons rules lawyers. It's like, well, you told me my bedtime was 10 o'clock and it's actually 9:58 and I haven't had my snack or my bedtime story, which means that I'm not allowed to go to bed yet until you do both of those things, and the time is after 10 o'clock. And I'm sitting here going, do you want your bedtime to be 9:30 tomorrow night? Then shut up. But that's the thing, is the insurance companies want to get your money. They don't want to give you money back. If you disagree with that, leave a comment on this video, because I would love to hear your perspective, especially if you work for an insurance company. But in my experience, they are more than happy to take your premium every month. And then when something happens, it's like, ooh, yeah, did you meet all of these random criteria? Like, for example, when this first started becoming a big thing, there weren't really a lot of things going on. Ben, you kind of pointed out, it was just a checklist that they sent you. I mean, has that been kind of some of your experience with it?
Well, yeah, we've been seeing customers for a while now that they, got a checklist every year, and they'd call us up and go, hey, do we meet this or not? And we'd go, well, maybe. And, they'd go, okay, yes. And that's all they had to do for their cyber insurance company. But lately, we're seeing more and more detailed attestation. It's almost to the level of, like you said, an audit. It reminds me of SOC 2 or HIPAA compliance or anything else. And this is driving customer adoption of technologies that before they would do the cost-benefit analysis of, well, this is going to slow my business down, or this is going to anger my users, or my CEO won't do MFA, so I'm not going to do it. Now it's not a question. Now the security guys are going, nope, cyber insurance guy says it has to, and the finance guy says we have to have cyber insurance, so therefore we're going to do it. And, you know, I worked in healthcare for 12 years. HIPAA was a wonderful bat to just, boom, if I could make HIPAA apply to something, the funding gates were open. Well, now cyber insurance is that for every industry.
And regulatory concerns have always been that, whether it's Sarbanes-Oxley or HIPAA or PCI.
Yep.
Yeah, the same thing applies if you've ever worked in a retail establishment. All you've got to do to get something done is just say PCI compliance. And it happens instantly, because the amount of money that you have to pay for violating those regulations far outweighs whatever the investment was going to be to make them work in the first place. But yeah, at first, the policy was basically like, oh man, let's just take their money. And then they actually had to start paying out millions of dollars on these breaches, because as we all know as security professionals, there's no such thing as unbreachable. And every company out there should just assume that you've been breached or soon will be, because you are. You are always a target. You're always going, if you're so lax in your security that it's easy to take your stuff, somebody will take your stuff. It's no different than leaving the front door of your house open or the trunk of your car open. Someone, a casual thief, will walk by and grab it. But now that insurance companies are like, well, wait a minute, we can actually mandate in policies that you must meet a certain minimum criteria. This is no different than any other thing that you've ever seen in an industry that is run by insurance agents. Housing, automobiles. In housing, you have to have a home inspection before they'll insure the house, right? To make sure that the foundation isn't falling apart, to make sure that the wiring isn't like substandard or from the 50s. Like, you got to think about all of these things as you're doing stuff, right? So why did it take so long for cyber insurance people to figure this out?
I mean, that's, for me personally, I'm coming from a completely different realm of perspective, right? Like, I've never had to deal with it in the sense that hearing about it, you think like, well, there's already these standards and policies in places. Cars, houses, you need to have, there's a checklist or a certain standard of requirements you need to meet in order to qualify or for that policy to be constituted. So I feel with cybersecurity, it's the same thing, right? Like, you're not going to set an infrastructure up, not have a firewall, not have testing, not have regular, you would think, but I mean, it's becoming more common because you need to do that in order to have that.
Anybody ever run a network without a firewall before?
Somebody, somewhere.
And that's the thing, because one of the flip side of that is, well, there's some common sense things, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes common sense things don't make common sense, because what if you're a decentralized organization that doesn't have a headquarters? What if you are in an environment where having firewalls is actually prohibited? So does that mean that the policy can no longer be enacted, or does that mean that, you know, you're putting undue harm on things? It would be like mandating that all of the doors in a house must be ADA compliant, even if you don't have anybody who lives there that would fall under ADA policy. It's an undue burden on somebody. Now, the way we get around that in residential life is we either sue or we don't use that insurance agency and they go out of business. But the market for cyber insurance is surprisingly small, because there are not a lot of people who are willing to stake their fortune on this. And the other thing is, and I'm sure that everybody out there knows, insurance companies in and of themselves take money from you, but they're not the only company that pays out in the event of a disaster. There's something called an underwriter. And in most cases, the underwriter is the most famous insurance company in the world, Lloyd's of London. They're the same people that insured Tina Turner's legs and the Dutch East India Company back in the 1600s are the same people that underwrite most insurance policies today. And boy, if you think insurance companies don't want to pay, Lloyd's definitely doesn't want to pay, because they get all of the money from everybody they underwrite, and that's what they use to keep their insurance empire going. So in part, the reason why we're here where we're at today is because the underwriters started pushing back on the companies and said, you can't just issue these policies with any hope that they'll never pay off. They will. So you need to put some basic protections in place. But are we doing enough to do that? Is my next question, because last time I checked, people are still getting breached.
You know, I think you said something, the undue burden. I really dislike that undue burden. I mean, if we held every company to the same standard, small businesses wouldn't survive. They wouldn't be able to grow. They'd be investing so much in IT and security, they can't support the basic needs of their business, of being able just to buy raw materials and produce a product or a service. I really don't like that. There's got to be some stepped thresholds with regard to whether or not you actually need cyber insurance. I also like the fact that I think, I don't know, I hope you guys can educate me, but is it optional to have cyber insurance? It should be completely optional, right?
It is.
A lot of insurances that we have here in the United States are not optional. If you want the privilege to drive a car, you must have insurance. That's not optional, because driving a car is a necessity of life. We've built a society where it has become a necessity.
Let's drill into that for a minute, because there's actually an important distinction there.
Please.
What kind of insurance is required for you to own an automobile? Anyone?
Liability
insurance.
Yep.
I am not protecting your car from damage. I am protecting somebody else from being hurt.
That's true.
You must carry liability insurance. If you are a homeowner, you have to carry certain forms of liability insurance so that if your house burns down, it doesn't cause other houses in the neighborhood to burn down either. Like that's basically what the purpose of that is to prevent a wider disaster. Security, I'm going to say this, I'm going to get roasted for it online, is effectively a victimless crime. Nobody got hurt in the commission of the crime. People got hurt because their data got stolen, because their identities got exposed. How many of you out there have 900 years of free credit monitoring thanks to all the data breaches that you've suffered? But there's no dollar amount, right? Like, the one time somebody tried to put a dollar amount on that breach, I forget which one it was, because I signed up for that class action thing, and the amount per person quickly went from $50 to 5 cents, because everybody in the world, I think it was Facebook that used that service, or no, it was Experian, that's what it was. When their credit monitoring database got breached, everybody who used Experian, and you use Experian whether you realize it or not, was able to file, and suddenly the monetary value went to nothing, which is why we got more free credit monitoring from a company that got breached. But we have certain kinds of insurance that are set up to protect life and limb. Right now, that's not the case. But what happens if a company finally gets to the point where it's so big that it has collected so much data that the likelihood of a breach could materially impact the lives of every person in the world?
I don't know, Tom. I mean, I guess maybe I would paint with a broad brush, but I would say, like, there's probably the majority of people in existence today, their data is already breached. And here we go, living our lives every day with almost no impact. Insurance didn't come before the lawyer. The lawyer came before the insurance. And I almost believe that it's the lawyers and the law system that gave birth to insurance. Someone needed to make a claim against someone who wasn't able to pay. And that's when the standard of insurance came up. And I'm just sort of hypothetically sort of taking the clock back, turning the hands of time back hundreds and hundreds of years to whenever the idea, the concept of insurance came about. It wasn't insurance first, right? Someone had to have suffered a loss, and someone stepped in and said, hey, I have a way we might be able to satisfy your needs and protect the business owners or the homeowners or the whatever by having a collective of money, having them pay into insurance in case someone gets hurt. Based on the probability, just like the casinos, right? The house always wins. Based on the probability, we can make money because I don't actually think that kind of accident's going to happen all the time. I feel like this is the same thing. It's a little bit of fear-mongering, and it's a little bit of fear-mongering, the same thing in cyber insurance as well.
Well, I mean, the thing with cyber insurance, though, too, if you're an officer of a company, you have a fiduciary duty to protect the company and the company's assets and the company's ability to continue to work, whether it's shareholders or a nonprofit, if you have a board or whatever it may be, right? And if the reputational damage alone, if you're breached, will cost millions of dollars. Let alone if you're a company that brings in a certain amount of money on a daily basis, and you're shut down for 2 months, and you don't bring that money in for 2 months, that could very easily, and small companies, large companies alike, could very easily just tank the business. I mean, your business goes under. So if you're an officer of the company, cyber insurance is to the point of it's not really optional. I don't think, and I think I think you're going to start seeing a lot more CFOs and CTOs and whatever driving that trend.
But I think the important difference is that it's not optional, but it's also not mandatory.
Yeah, but I was going to say,
correct.
The scenarios you've described certainly can happen. But I think we've seen over the past 3, 4, 5 years that it's just not true in the majority of situations. A business may suffer a loss, but it's not catastrophic. Experian, TransUnion, they're all still out there. Clorox is still out there. The Maersk shipping containers, they had the huge ransomware. It took down their entire system. They're still in business. They're still the largest container shipping company in the world.
Yeah. But for
they may have suffered a hit, but having insurance doesn't prevent it. It doesn't put them out of business. The fact is these CEOs, CFOs keep marching on every day, unaffected.
Sometimes, while it is about the insurance piece, it's about how are you going to persevere and move forward. It has to be the company mindset, right? Like you're going to be a victim of that, and you're going to suffer, and you're going to either bounce back or you're not. Whether you're a small business, whether you're, because that's the thing. The insurance is there as that leverage. It's that safeguard almost, but from the company perspective, you have to think outside of that and think 5 steps ahead. Are we going to bounce back? How do we, persevere from that type of attack, or are we not?
Another thing is like you have as a user, as someone who's going to be impacted by a cyber breach. If I sign up for a website, I'm putting my data in there. Yeah. I'm consciously doing so. I'm voluntarily doing so. How do I know whether or not that company has cyber insurance? As far as I've seen, it's never been published.
How do you know if the person driving on the road next to you has car insurance?
What you don't, it's a matter of compliance, right? You have to assume that they're complying with the laws that have been established.
And even if they're complying with the law, do they carry enough insurance to pay for damages to your car, or are they just carrying liability only? And that comes down to a lot of the discussion that we have about cyber insurance. Yes, it's for business continuity. It is for being able to keep operations going. A lot of people are like, oh yeah, we're going to get a big payout because we got breached. No, this is basically to make sure that you don't have to shut your doors. And I would argue that in the case of something like Maersk, the reason why they're still in business is because they can't fail. And when you are a large company that has a presence on the stock market, you get a little bit of extra leeway with some restrictions because, as we brought up, one of the reasons why it does seem like there have been a lot more breaches as of late is because we finally know that people are being breached. There was a rule that was introduced by the SEC that went into effect in mid-December of 2023 that now says that if you suffer a breach that is materially relevant to your financial statements, you must disclose within 15 days. And we saw a lot of companies that were trying to get really creative with, well, this isn't really material. Or, when you say 15 days, do you mean like 15 days? Business days, days that are not weekends, because they don't want to report this. Because now that they are mandated to report this by the oversight agency that basically says that you're allowed to be on the stock market or you get huge fines if you don't follow our policies. Now they're having to say, oh yeah, there was this thing where all of our data got stolen and all of your backups got locked up in the cloud and we can't find out how to get them and we need to figure out if we're going to have to pay.
So, we've been focusing a lot this week and in this discussion about data. What happens when my data is breached or released? We've had enough examples lately of supply chain attacks that makes me wonder, our favorite fall boy out of Seattle/Chicago, Boeing, what would happen if the hackers, instead of trying to ransomware Boeing, got into their supply chain, embedded something in the avionics code that got put into a bunch of new 737s or whatever, or even patched onto a bunch of 747s, 757s. Now we're not talking data, we're talking human lives that are in the balance.
It's an interesting point.
Does cyber insurance cover human lives?
Not unless you've specifically written a policy, no. And I promise you that if you try to attach that into a policy, your premiums are going to be astronomical.
All right, so ultimately, what's the point?
Well, but what? Okay, so
we're leaking data all the time.
Well, hold on.
Breaches. Go on. Have I been pwned? Dozens and dozens of websites that I'm a part of have been breached.
But for every one of the companies that we've noted that has had a bounce back, they've been able to bounce back from. There are a number of companies that have not. I mean, the example that just pops into my head, and I can't think of a ton of them right now, but the one that pops in my head is the payment processor for UMR. UMR, big insurance company, right? The payment processor for them filed for bankruptcy. UMR, of course, in their benevolent way, swept in to buy them, which was a little shady in my opinion. But that's the cost of doing business. I mean, they're shut. They couldn't recover, and there are a lot of companies like that have not been able to recover from
cyber insurance have? It's a what-if situation, I know, but
if they had enough money coming in, from the policy to ride out the period where they're trying to recover their data before they can make money again, then they could have survived. Now, I mean, but it's a gamble. It's like anything.
But does cyber insurance cover your operating costs post-breach that you need to be able to survive, or does it cover paying back your customers, paying for that data or insurance?
And that is up to how the policy is negotiated. But most people are going to say, we're going to prioritize continuing operations. So here's a good example. Have you ever had to file for unemployment?
I have.
That's an insurance policy. You pay into it, or your employer pays into the unemployment insurance premium. When you file for unemployment insurance, do you get your entire salary?
No.
You get a percentage of it, right? And only for a certain period of time, contingent upon certain restrictions like I'm actively looking for a job, right? The purpose of unemployment insurance is not for you to go out and buy a new yacht. The purpose is to give you enough income that you can go find a job. And that's why crafty insurance companies and companies who want to keep their premiums low are going to write in policies that say, we're going to have enough to cover the ongoing operational costs and whatever. Or some of them are flat out saying, we're writing this policy so that if we ever get breached and we have to pay, we have enough money to pay. Because that was one of the things that a lot of companies that were being breached, especially in late 2022 and early 2023, were hearing from the people that were attacking them. The attackers were going after companies who were cyber insured because they knew they had enough money to pay.
And the other thing as well is that when you're dealing with car insurance, it's pretty well defined, right? I mean, what kind of liabilities you're going to cover against, what kind of vehicle. You have an idea of the range of the damage which a car can sustain. But here, when you're talking, you don't have two similar organizations. So some organizations are going to prioritize, for example, the recovery. They will want to cover a broader or narrower scope, maybe even plan for a longer or shorter period for recovery, which is, again, based on what technology they have in-house, right? So I would say it's more of an add-on, perhaps, to make sure that you have that kind of extra buffer rather than something which is going to save them. Because as you were saying, all of us, right? The cost, if you want to embed everything into such a policy, is really going to be astronomical. So it doesn't make sense economically, perhaps.
Insurance companies will insure you for anything you want, and the likelihood of it happening is how much you have to pay.
Well, and I think Max made a great point here. I think it also comes back to what's your business impact analysis say, right? Like if I'm going to say that it's going to cost me $500 million in 3 months if XYZ event happens, then that's what my cyber insurance policy needs to be, or I need to have that in cash reserves or a mix of both. I can't just rely on, well, I think it's probably going to be $50 million over the next 3 weeks, and that's what I get underwritten for, but then I get breached, and that's not enough, and I don't have the resources that I need to, if I need to buy a new data center or pay all these fines to be able to get back to the state that I need to be in.
And part of the reason we're having this conversation is, like we mentioned, other insurance markets are pretty much, they're a solved problem, right? I know what a house should be insured for based on a lot of data input. I know what life insurance should cost based on actuarial tables. Given a certain set of circumstances, I know how long a person should live. And that's why you can get life insurance policies for as little as $1 a day or whatever they're selling you on whatever infomercial you hear it from. But cyber insurance is such a crazy Wild West style market that we have no idea of how to do things. but we're already kind of seeing some of the fallout from that. Did you have a point you wanted to add?
Oh, I was just going to agree, and I think the impact, kind of what Sky was alluding to, the impact is going to vary so much depending on what the attack is, and the different types of attacks are evolving all the time, every day. So I think going back to what are those critical operations, I think would become very important.
And perhaps paradoxically, saying the cost of such an insurance could be kind of a driver to improve your own operations to avoid paying that kind of premium eventually.
Or eventually the insurance market jumps in and starts mandating certain things in order to keep the cost of insurance low.
Yeah.
One of my favorite examples of this is airbags. Do you think car companies want to put airbags in their cars? If you ask any representative of a car company today, the marketing people will be like, yes, you do. Yes, we do. We like to protect our customers. But I promise you at first it wasn't that. It was insurance companies going, you're going to put these in cars because they save lives. I mean, go all the way back to Unsafe at Any Speed from Ralph Nader in the, I believe it was the 50s or the 60s, where he browbeat car companies into putting seatbelts into cars. Because in the old days, putting seatbelts in cars was a dumb idea. I ain't going to wear no seatbelt. I don't drive like an idiot. You can't prove that for everybody in the world. But now, cyber insurance underwriting companies are coming in and going, you have a basic packet filter firewall? Those are things so outdated. Those are from like the early 2000s. Those don't work anymore. And so they're starting to do things like, zero trust models and host interrogation when they join a network, and all the things that you've seen that are like pie in the sky ideas are being implemented more and more simply because insurance companies say you have to have them or we will not issue you a policy. Not we'll issue you one with a ridiculous premium. We just won't write you one at all because it's kind of a basic safety feature. So is the cyber insurance market driving innovation and security because they're basically setting a baseline for what companies need to have to be secure? Back to your point, Tony, mom and pop storefront is not Amazon, but if the insurance company says you kind of have to have the same protections across the board, maybe in different sizes, then maybe there's an organization out there saying you do have similarity.
So maybe another point, which is, I don't want to expand it too much because we're going to go into another set of debates, is that you also have two kind of situations, or one where you did a misconfiguration and you are impacted because you did something wrong or something stupid. But on the other hand, you're also consuming products from companies which are probably not delivered in the necessary quality. So product riddled with bugs, with vulnerabilities and so on. So what do you do now? Are we going to regulate those guys as well?
Hold that thought because I have something to go on, but I wanted to give Krista a chance to talk.
Oh, I was just going to say, using the example of kind of your small mom and pop shop to a larger company, going back to the supply chain comment, I mean, potentially, what if they're doing business together or things like that? They're within kind of that supply chain ecosystem. Then it's kind of protection if they're doing business together as well.
So you bring up an interesting point. What happens if I implement a tool that has a known breach in it or a known vulnerability and that causes my organization to get breached? It's not my fault. I did what you told me to do. How do you think the insurance company is going to pay for that? I'll give you a hint. They're going to find the money.
Yep.
You know where they're going to get the money from? The company that they recommended that had a material breach. So now you've actually got, for lack of a better term, a Mexican standoff. Because now you've got the insurance company pointing fingers at everybody going, you need to be better about security. You've got the user pointing fingers at the insurance company and the vendor saying, you need to make sure that I'm protected, and that if I'm not, I have money to pay. And then you've got the vendor pointing fingers at the user saying, we're going to give you the best stuff we've got, but also at the insurance company saying, if this isn't up to par, you're coming after me for this money. Because I guarantee you, if they say, let's just throw a name out there. If they say that you must use Symantec Cyber Defense, I don't think that's a product, but we'll just say that it is. And it turns out that it causes breaches or is susceptible to that, the insurance company is going to pay you because they have to, because the policy says they do. But then they're going right after Symantec in court saying, you caused this and we want all of that money back.
So on our latest audit, for lack of a better word, to get our cyber insurance policy updated. They've started getting fairly sophisticated. You know, they've obviously got people on staff who know what they're talking about, but they haven't been mandating products, but they have started mandating technologies. So, for example, DNSSEC was a requirement for us to get the policy, and that was something that, you know, we put in place and whatever. They've started asking if you've got a SOC. If you don't have a SOC, they don't want to insure you. If you don't have a SIM that the SOC's using, you know, et cetera, right? So,
and that way, it reduces the overall risk of the market in general, one bite at a time. You know, we're eating this elephant one bite at a time. So now, this year it is you must have DNSSEC. Next year you must have a SOC that reports into a SIEM. Next year that SIEM must be integrated with some kind of a SOAR capability to reduce dwell time. Now, everybody in here would agree that all of those steps are valuable ones to take. And every one of the people in here and out there would agree that those steps are not inconsequential when it comes to buying that product. But by implementing them on a yearly cadence, I have raised the overall risk mitigation factor for every company that I insure. Now, does that mean that you can't be breached because something got in from somewhere else, or that a company that you partner with got breached and therefore you got breached too? No, but it means that you've reduced your risk profile enough that you can A, take the payout, and B, find ways to get your money back.
So you mentioned, you know, your partners being involved. Earlier, Taryn mentioned BitSight. You know, that's the FICO score of cyber insurance now, and we're seeing more and more with BitSight, UpGuard, and similar companies where our customers are then buying their services to then evaluate the partners that they're working with, especially in healthcare. It's like, okay, we're dealing with this healthcare entity. We're going to have a VPN open all the time for, you know, patient data to go back and forth. Are they really secure? Mm-hmm. Do we know? And now, granted, BitSight and those guys, they only see the outside. Heaven help us if cyber insurance companies ever start feeding data from these audits back to these type of companies, because there are a lot of companies that will suddenly be uninsurable.
I think that's going to happen.
I was about to say,
yeah,
heaven ain't going to help us there, because these insurance companies are absolutely going to do that, because by doing that, they are going to either force higher premiums,
yep,
or they're going to force these organizations to increase their security posture.
Yep.
One way or another, they win.
Well, like, you know, have you done an ISO 27001 audit? You know, a gap analysis, whatever you want to call it, right? If you haven't, we're not going to insure you, or your rates will be high. Mm-hmm. You know, that's just one, you know, rubric that you could use. I mean, there's other ones out there. Obviously, the ISO thing is not the end all be all, but I could see them pulling that.
But it's actually it's an interesting development, because we've actually seen this happening in the greater insurance market. So for everybody who doesn't already know, I live in Oklahoma. Y'all know what happens in Oklahoma. It's Tornado Alley, right? I can still get homeowners insurance in Oklahoma. I pay a little bit higher rate because baseballs hit my roof all the time, and there's a possibility of a mile-wide windstorm wiping the house off the foundations, but it doesn't mean that I'm uninsurable. But there are places that are. We've seen a number of major insurance companies that have started to pull out of locations like Florida, where they basically threw up their hands and say, no amount of premium upcharge can make us be able to do business in the state because of things like hurricanes, or flood insurance for when you live on the coast, when there's a very real possibility that the sea level is going to rise very soon. So insurance companies, there's always going to be somebody who's willing to write you a policy. Whether or not they can pay off on it is a completely different matter, as long as they can just get your premiums in. So will we see consolidation in the cyber insurance market, where large carriers maybe want to buy out some of these smaller groups, add cyber insurance as an offering once the market has hit maturity, in the hopes that they can augment their existing revenues, knowing that they're not going to have to pay out because there's so much work that's been done to effectively raise the floor of what constitutes a valid policy?
I just want to say that I really hate the idea of compliance driving design, and I think that's what's going to happen if compliance gets the upper hand. When they start mandating certain technologies, eventually it's going to come down to certain configurations of those technologies, and at some point that's going to dictate the design, which is going to stifle growth and innovation in IT, I believe. So that's my opinion. Secondly, but to circle it back to something that we saw this week, it's not just a matter of treating compliance as a checkbox, because actually I see this all the time in my real life work with the customers I support. We have to be compliant. If there's a new CVE that comes out, I get a message from SOC and all these other enforcement agencies that say, now I need to change this configuration. But something that we saw this week from Palo Alto Networks presenting the recent acquisition of Dig Security is, it's not just that I may have a Cisco ASA with some CVE and RCE in the web VPN configuration. What's the risk level? What is it actually? What is the actual risk? What is the data I'm protecting? And do I even have the web VPN feature turned on? You know, so there are some cases where I'm forced to comply to a certain configuration standard, whether or not I have those features turned on, just as a matter of getting 100% compliance. And I find that ridiculous because it really constrains our designs, our network design, and how we can operate.
You're absolutely right, Tony. When compliance drives design, everybody pays. By the way, did you know that this website uses cookies and may collect personal data? And I just need you to click accept all right here. Everybody knows what that pop-up looks like, right? You know why you see it? Compliance. And if you live here in the US, it's compliance with a law that it doesn't even apply to you. That's GDPR. You must, yeah, Max is like, hey, that's me. But no, it's compliance with the law, because it turns out it's actually cheaper for these companies to just put that up everywhere until you click accept all than it is to try to figure out where you're coming in from. Compliance driving design is something that we've dealt with for years, because that is the way that people can make sure that you're paying attention. If you are a reader of my blog, which I hope you are, you may have noticed that I put out a post a few weeks ago about user friction as a security tool. And the oldest example of that for the seminal 1982 war games is when you walk into the missile silo and two men have two keys that are on opposite sides of the room and they must turn them at the same time. There's a reason why they're 10 feet apart. It's because nobody has 10-foot-long arms. No one person can launch a nuclear missile. And no two people can do it because they need the codes that are authenticated by a third person, the President of the United States. Now, this is not 1982. Those keys have been replaced a long time ago. But the point is that by creating friction in compliance needs, I can increase my security profile. Anybody have two-factor authentication enabled on any of their accounts? And you better say yes. If you don't, go turn it on now. Because we are creating friction, forcing you to type in a code from an authentication app, or please don't use SMS, just use an authentication app. But that friction drives design. I actually won't use a system now that doesn't have two-factor as an auth option, because somebody tried to reset my Facebook password 8 times last week, and I kept getting an email with the code, but I have two-factor turned on, meaning there's no way for them to break into my account. I don't know what they want. Quite honestly, I don't care. But that compliance need has driven that design. I see where you're coming from, but at the same time, I sleep soundly at night knowing that when I get 19 requests to reset my Apple password, that none of them are going to go through, unless I'm the one who initiates.
Well, you know, from my perspective, the cyber insurance is going to happen. There's a business opportunity. It's going to happen. There's going to be different policies, like, you know, paying the ransomware or paying for the recovery. So there's going to be different types of policies, just like there is for everything. And I think is actually a good thing for the industry, because I think it does force a very healthy discussion of how we protect ourselves. I think it allows businesses to have a way of recovering. Businesses don't work in silos, they work with other businesses. And so knowing that another business has insurance, you know, is also very good. Just like you were saying with other motorists that have insurance is good for me. In California, we have the most motorists that don't carry insurance. So I have to carry insurance to protect myself if they don't have insurance. And so I think this is a healthy thing. I do think, in agreement with your comment, is that it's very changeable. The world, unlike our homes and our cars and things like that is more static. This is a very changeable environment, and I don't know how the insurance agency will deal with that. I was recently forced to, for instance, my car insurance now won't, in California, it's very difficult to get insured for anything. And for my car insurance, it's now 6 months instead of a year. So they can assess me after 6 months. I'm wondering if the cybersecurity will try and do certain techniques like that. It won't be the same. They have to protect themselves. But there's business to be made, so there's money to be made, so it will happen.
Or they just hire an outside party to do a penetration test or something on a regular basis for their clients to ensure compliance.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
You have an army of red team people that are now employed by the insurance agents. Man, 18-year-old me is screaming at this idea. Man, I really wish I could have done that.
Tom, they don't even need that anymore. They can automate that using automated pen testing tools and get 85 to 90% of what those red teamers are doing on a regular basis. Do it weekly if they wanted to. We're actually seeing customers that are buying that type of product and doing it internally on a monthly basis. And it kind of gives them a hit list of, okay, well, this is the thing that it used to own us this time, so that's what we're going to fix next. And it's almost better than your average vulnerability scanner because it gives you not only, like you were saying about, is it how much of a risk is it, but it gives you something that actually has been exploited.
Sorry, you said almost, and I must quote my good friend Ivan Pepelniak. Well, almost. Apologies, Ivan, if you watched that. But the problem is that, yes, I can get 90% of what they offer, but the devil's in those 10%. Because, we can protect against known attacks. We can protect against things that we have figured out. You can't protect against XZ utils. Like, we had no idea how that was going to happen, and that was honestly something that took months to pull off, years to pull off in this case, but it was a very directed hack.
But here's the thing, Tom. Most of the breaches that are happening that are causing all these headlines, they're not novel. They're weak link humans clicking on links, phishing attacks, like the MGM help desk got owned by somebody using AI voice technology. It's not new. They're not having to look for that weird exploit. They're going after things that people haven't patched for 20 years.
Well, reference back to XKCD. It's like hacking in the movies is like, oh, I'm going to drop this exploit and then the next panel is like how hacking happens in real life. Let's beat him with a wrench until he gives up the password. That's what happened with Uber. Yep. When lapses hit those guys, it wasn't, like, ooh, let's use this specially crafted multiple 0-day blah, 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 whatever. It was like, let's just go find a help desk employee and pay him $200 for his login for an hour. And it worked. They had admin on the internal Slack channel. Like, that's a hard problem to solve, and it kind of goes back to one of the things that Tony brought up. Can you insure a person? Or better yet, can you insure against a person's stupidity? Because I promise you, didn't we see that stat somewhere in one of the presentations this week that something like 80% of attacks are actually caused by humans, whether they did something stupid or they were tricked into doing something stupid? How do you prevent that? I mean, we've evidently done it for hundreds of years. How do you prevent a captain of a sailing ship from not sailing into a storm? How do you prevent someone who's texting and driving from not rear-ending you? I mean, we may not be able to prevent it, but man, we can make money off of it.
Yeah, I just remember seeing, I think it was a guy, I think it was from Rapid7, was doing a presentation, and he was a pen tester by trade, and he's like, I'd love to stand up here and tell you that all the times I get into all of your networks, it's because I have this cool 0-day, but really it's because your password policy ingrains in people that they can just change their password every 90 days. So they have spring 2024 exclamation mark, then fall 2024 exclamation mark. He said the list of passwords I really need to spray to get into your organizations is pretty slim.
The Microsoft hack that happened at the end of last year, where a nation-state actor was able to copy executive emails and exfiltrate them, was because a service account had a weak password. And they just hit it with like the top 1,000 passwords, because guess what else it didn't have? A lockout timer. So yeah.
Well, so Tom, to your point on how do we fix the human factor? Well, part of the answer to that is just remove the human, right?
Clarify, how are we removing them?
I say this in not like the, we're talking about Nuke's way.
But just to clarify, his name is Sky. Skynet.
No.
My laptop name is Skynet. I'm just saying. No. So, I mean, to your point earlier about the Minutemen and the missile silos with nukes. Well, yeah, we had the keys and we had people down there and we trusted them to do that, right? But over time, we've found out that there's a better way and we've removed people from being down there in those silos and we've implemented new controls and new technologies. I think we're going to see a lot in the industry, as we've already done, where we remove a lot of the human touch, where maybe where we can increase automation, we don't have to do these high-risk activities like creating privileged accounts or resetting a domain admin's password. There's a lot of ways that we can automate that to where you can't necessarily social engineer your way into that. There's going to be a lot of technical vulnerabilities that we still have to fix, but we may not necessarily have to worry about the human factor as much, which I think we've seen.
I will remind you that XZUtil's vulnerability was detected by a human factor. A wonderful human being at Microsoft who was timing logins through SSH. We got to get you a better hobby, buddy. but the thing is that for every human in the loop causing a problem, there's a human in the loop solving a problem. I mean, go read Ghost in the Wires, Kevin Mitnick's autobiography. He got caught because some telephone company employee really, really wanted to catch him. Like that's the thing. We can't, as much as we might like to reduce the impact that humans have, we can't completely eliminate them because machines think inside of a box. Humans think outside of a box. And as long as humans keep thinking outside of a box and attacking us, machines will never be able to counter them until we know how they're doing it.
Yeah, and I think to reframe kind of what I was saying, it's not necessarily we remove all humans, right? Like I'm not advocating that humans don't exist.
Good. I just wanted to make sure that we were clear on that.
But if we can automate those tasks, right? A lot of the tasks that maybe we don't necessarily need to do anymore because we can script these with CI/CD pipelines or automation where we can, then it also frees up that engineer of, okay, well, instead of taking my entire job and being a DBA all day, I can actually go learn security and here's the things that I can focus on, and we're actually repositioning them within the company or the environment to actually go out and have the time and the cycles to understand the environment better and think outside the box and challenge that.
Sky, the year is 2045. IPv6 will almost be implemented. It is once again the year of VDI, and this is the year that my users will not click on fake phishing emails.
It's also the year of Linux on the desktop.
That's true. The problem is, all joking aside, is that we relied on these things for so many times. This time is the time that I'm going to convince the people in my purchasing department not to do business email compromise. Because CEO totally wants to pay this invoice in Apple gift cards. Like in my head, I know that's wrong, right? Nobody pays that. But that's the thing is they're not going after people who are well-versed in this stuff. Yeah. So everybody in here gets spam all the time, right? Do you ever wonder why it's misspelled? It's on purpose, believe it or not. They're actively weeding out people who are like, that doesn't look right. They're looking for people who look for the misspellings and just look over them because ultimately that means that they are more likely to click on things. We deal with that with insurance companies all the time. You know, the big ones are kind of basically like faceless, jakes out there. Like they have a process, they do things, all of that. It's the fly-by-night ones that are like, hey, just ignore that part over there that says we don't actually have to pay out on this policy if this one random thing happens. Like there was an episode of Married with Children years ago, like Al got Bud car insurance from this fly-by-night farmers group, and so the thing was he had to drive around with like a chicken in his car the whole time in order to be covered under the insurance. And yes, it was some great like comedy in the episode, as great of comedy as Married with Children could be. But at the end of the day, what ended up happening was like they got into a wreck without the chicken in the car, and it means the car got totaled, and hilarity ensues. But like that's one of the things that I fear we're going to run into sooner or later is that these insurance companies are going to put such a crazy burden on people that they have to have all of these things that eventually it will just be worth more money to get breached and pay the ransom than it will be to pay for the remediation for it.
I don't know if we'll get quite to that point though, because the insurance companies are not going to want to cannibalize their own model. I mean, you know, if you go so far that direction to where nobody can afford the insurance anymore, they're killing their business. So I think there's a point. You're right. It's like boil a frog, right? Slowly get up, but don't go all the way. Get it to where the frog's a little uncomfortable, but
squeeze them until they squeak, and then turn the knob down one notch.
Exactly.
All right, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up there because I think we've talked this topic to death. But the good news is that if you're watching this video on YouTube, you can revisit all of the discussion points. And maybe if you're watching this video in a couple of years, things will have improved. And maybe it really will be the year of the Linux desktop. Who knows? But we invite your comments. We invite you to have conversations with us through social media and everything else, because that's what we do here at Field Day.